Hey everybody, I'm Sasha and this is the Crossroads podcast on Flevity.org. This episode is an interview with MK Fain, a woman who was also fired from her job after posting her gender critical views online. She writes on her website, which is called 4W, and she also has a platform called Spinsters.xyz, which you might have heard of as being a sort of alternative Twitter where people who were censored or banned on Twitter can go and take their platform. So we talked about what it's like being fired for your opinions, or in her case, it was a little bit more complicated, which it was an interesting case of potential retaliation against her for having organized and been outspoken at the company. And without further ado, here is my interview with MK Fain. So Mary Kate, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
So we've had really sort of uncannily similar experiences. We were both fired after we wrote online our opinions about gender identity ideology. So can you start by telling us where you worked that you were fired from and a little bit about your career and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So in November of 2018, I started working at PromptWorks in Philadelphia, which is a software engineering agency. They work with different clients to help them build a software project. So clients might include people like Wells Fargo or the US government. They do some contracting with them. All the way down to like small startups who you might have never heard of, who are just trying to get their little app off the ground. So specifically, I was working on a project with Urban Outfitters. And so that's pretty much what I did for the less than a year that I was there. It was about 8 months, I believe. This was my first real job in programming. I had sort of, actually what's very common story for women in engineering is I started off in a totally different field. I started off in nonprofit work doing communications for them. And through doing that, I was actually working at the YWCA in a place outside of Philadelphia. And they needed a new website, and they were like, "You're young, you can learn how to code and make us a website." And I was like, "What? How am I supposed to do this?" But I did. I learned how to code, and I helped them with their website. And through that, I realized I actually really liked doing that. And so then around the same time, my partner and I were getting really into animal rights activism. And so we actually started running our own web agency as a way to basically fund our life of full-time activism. And so that's what I was doing for a couple years leading up to getting this job at PromptWorks. I had built a portfolio of different projects I had worked on by then, but this was my first real job in the industry. So then it was June of 2019, I believe, that I was fired. And yeah, it was after less than a year there where there actually were some other problems going on at the agency, which I think is a little bit different from your story, because this agency had actually just laid off half of their female engineers. And they were going through a lot of financial troubles, and when they disproportionately fired female engineers because of these financial troubles, I raised a bit of a stink about it. And so I think I maybe had a little bit of a bullseye on my head because of that. But then what I wrote about gender identity, this article was called "Non-Binary is the New Not Like Other Girls, and it's deeply rooted in misogyny." And that article was what caused them to fire me. And they did actually name that in the letter when they fired me, specifically said it was because of this article. There was no question about what their reasoning was.
Okay, and had they received complaints, to your knowledge, about the article?
Yes, I believe that they did. I still don't know who it was. I believe there were a couple people at the organization or agency who I was friends with, and so like they followed me on Medium, which is where I had posted the article. I didn't have any social media accounts at the time. I didn't have a Facebook or a Twitter account, so I wasn't like sharing it on social media. I had just written it on Medium, and then it was cross-posted to my personal website, my marykatefain.com website. So I believe that one of my coworkers who follows me on Medium saw it and complained. They did mention that they received a complaint, but they didn't say if it was inside or outside the organization. But then after I was fired, it became clear that a whole bunch of people in the Philly tech world had discovered the article and were causing quite a stink and trying to get me canceled from everywhere. Different organizations that I volunteered with, other feminist organizations, pretty much anything that I had an affiliation with, they were trying to get me canceled from.
So it's interesting because it sounds like there was another labor issue going on, and it was partly retaliation against you.
Yeah, I do think that in part it was. I can't prove it, but I think that if this hadn't been happening, then they might have thought twice a little bit about firing me so quickly with no conversation and no other discussion. But yeah, what had happened was they, like I mentioned, they were experiencing financial troubles, and they laid off half of their female engineering staff, but only a quarter of their male engineering staff. And it was pretty shocking because there were only 4 of us anyways, female engineers. And so when the other 2 were fired, there were only 2 of us left, versus there were like 20 something male engineers. So it was really shocking to the 2 of us that were left. And, we were all pretty close friends. So it was really disturbing. And I had approached my direct supervisor about this, who he was kind of new to the company at the time. And I saw him as a potential ally. So I had approached him with basically a presentation that I planned to give at the next diversity, equity, and inclusion meeting. And the presentation was pretty harsh. It called out like, hey, like what happened here was not okay. And we want to see some dramatic changes in how women at this company are treated going forward, or else basically. Like, I was kind of at my wit's end there anyways. But then it was only about, he ended up talking me down off the ledge of giving that presentation. And he said that instead, he thought it would be more powerful if it came from someone in charge and that he would take the role of calling these things out in the meeting, which I thought was helpful. So anyways, that meeting came and went, but it was very clear that I was not happy with how they had handled this layoff. And so then it was about 2 weeks after this, I believe, that my article made the rounds in the tech community and got back to my company, and then I was fired.
So you pointed out before how the firing people for their opinions, or in your case, it does sound like it was more complicated. And it's interesting because it's interesting the way employers will use these situations.
Yes.
In my case, there were no other issues. I mean, I was a brand new employee. I had been interning with my agency for a while, but everything had been going, extremely well. But when there was a complaint made on Twitter about me, it was seized upon, not because in your case they were waiting to maybe try to get rid of me, but just because they were trying to, in my opinion, save face, right?
Yeah.
So so I mean, what do you think about that before we get to like exactly why you're fired and what you think, which is the really fun part? What about that side of it, of people who are cheering on other people getting fired just because they disagree with them, and the labor side of that, sort of like lack of any class consciousness, or even just empathy for people's livelihoods?
Yeah, so I think that actually was a really big part of why I was fired, because they had just gone through this really bad PR situation with laying off half their female engineering staff. And some of us were talking to reporters, and I think that they probably knew, I'm sure the reporters were reaching out to them. And the 4 of us, the 2 who were fired and the 2 who weren't, like we were considering a lot of options, including, making a really big stink about this for them publicly. So they were in a position where PromptWorks was not looking like the liberal, progressive, feminist space that they claim to be through, their other actions, like, oh, we sponsor these women in tech groups, or, we go to these female STEM conferences, whatever. So they were in a position where they were about to be exposed, I think, for underlying sexism that didn't go with their brand. So then when they had the opportunity to we can kill two birds with one stone here. We can get rid of this troublemaker, and it will make us look really good to these people. We will be progressive icons. And that's what they did. They made quite a show when they fired me. They called together the team and had like a whole meeting denouncing what I had written and talking about their commitment to inclusion. And it really became a kind of a talking point that I saw in the tech community about, well, PromptWorks did the right thing. And they used that, I think, to cover up, or at least distract from, what they had just done, which is now they had fired 75% of their female engineering staff, leaving one single female engineer at the entire company of over 30 people.
It's really, I think, enlightening that the issue that was already happening was a sexism one. So, I mean, you're saying that they were then giving themselves a pat on the back for being inclusionary. I guess women aren't supposed to be included. And I think it's really, really striking that you were actually trying to bring sexism to light. So what they did in response to that was get rid of another woman.
Right, exactly. And to your point about the lack of class analysis, one thing that was particularly shocking to me was a few of us had been in the process of trying to do some labor organizing here. And this was before the layoffs. And some of the people who were laid off were the key organizers around what we were trying to do. And I'm not sure how much of this is still going on there, so I don't want to say too much, I guess. I do still support my former colleagues in that aspect. But one of the women who was fired was a Marxist, and a very outspoken Marxist. She had in the past worked for labor organizing organizations. She had done work for unions. She was working on a project. Actually, we were able to do what was called like a 20% time or something, where we could spend 20% of our work hours working on a side project that we were passionate about. And so her project was actually an app that would help companies unionize. And so she was working on this, and she was very passionate about labor. And when she was fired, all of us supported her and had her back. And I should say laid off, because they would disagree that she was fired when she was laid off. But then when I was fired, there was no support from her, no support from any of the people who had been involved in the labor organizing there. And suddenly the entire class analysis, all of their leftist politics, just went out the window because they were able to write me off because of what I had written.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into that. This issue, what you wrote about, what I wrote about, what got both of us fired, which is a huge, maybe blind spot for the left. Maybe it's not blindness, maybe it's something else. But so tell us about that article.
Yes. So like I said, it was called Non-Binary is the New Not Like Other Girls, and it's deeply rooted in misogyny. And basically what the article did was it examined 3 past friendships that I had had with different women who I would consider best friends, like more than best friends in some of the cases. In one case, it was a woman who I really, truly loved very deeply. She was very close to me. And the other 2 I would consider best friends, and they were my roommates at certain points. And so I was examining the relationships that I had, I was examining what I had seen happen with these 3 women who had each, over the course of a very short period of time, all decided that they were non-binary, no longer identified as women. And so I changed their names and talked about how I had seen different aspects of patriarchy pushing them each in this direction. I talked about, for one of them, how I knew her history of sexual violence. I knew how she struggled with her sexual orientation and was afraid to come out to her parents, who were from a community where it's not very popular to be gay, and she knew that they would not be accepting of this. And so I talked about, for her, how I saw that this drive to not be a woman was very much related to her history of sexual violence and her desire to not be gay, because if you're not a woman, then you can be attracted to women, and that's okay. And so then I also talked about another friend who had really struggled with body image issues. and she struggled with self-harm and hating herself and hating the, you know, natural roles and the natural shape of her body. And I think that she genuinely probably did have some sort of body dysmorphia, because, you know, I've read some of her writing about her body. And it's clear that she really struggled with what society places on the female body. And so I wrote about her. And then the third friend that I wrote about is probably one of the most empathetic and kind people who I've known. And she just absorbs everyone else's pain, you know? And so she was living with us and all of us had experienced some sort of male violence in some way, but she probably had the least direct personal experience. But she saw for all of us what being a woman meant and how painful it was, and what a source of constant agony being a woman in this world was for all of the people that she loved. And I think for her, that's what motivated her desire to not be a woman. And so basically that's what I wrote. I said that I also talked about some pop culture situations and compared. I talked about the way that different writers have talked about the non-binary experience. And the overall point that I made was, these are still females. They might want to identify out of being a woman, but that's not going to protect them from sexism and the patriarchy. They're still going to face the same oppression. And all they're really doing with this identity is trying to escape womanhood and throwing the rest of us under the bus by saying, well, if you're a woman, then you identify with this oppression. And that's something that I really disagreed with. I don't think the oppression that I experienced was any different than the oppression that they experienced, because I maintained the biological reality of my sex, because I'm not in denial of it. That's the only difference. And that was my horrible bigoted hate speech.
And what were you accused of? I mean, was it transphobia? It's funny how similar the points we made were, because that got us fired, because my tweet that got me fired was about pronouns, about they, them pronouns. Mm-hmm. And it was similar to the point you're making, that switching pronouns doesn't do anything to help stop sexism. So, So what did the letter say when you got fired? What was that conversation? Was there a conversation?
There was a little bit, yeah. So the letter, the actual reason I was fired was not for transphobia. I was fired for a violation of their social media policy, which, to remind everyone, as I mentioned, I did not have social media at the time. I didn't have a Twitter. I didn't have a Facebook. I created all of those accounts after I was fired to promote my writing. And so what they argued, and we kind of got into a little bit of back and forth while they were firing me, because I really wanted as much clarity as I could get. And they said that it was because on my personal website, I include on my resume, which is on my personal website, that I work at PromptWorks. And on a different page of the website, I also link to my Medium blog. And they said because the website included that I worked at PromptWorks, and later, on a different page, included a link to my Medium blog, that was the violation of the social media policy. And so I asked them, so you're saying that if I had not put my resume or hadn't said that I worked at PromptWorks on my website, then it wouldn't be a violation and I wouldn't be fired? And they said, well, we would probably still be having a conversation, is pretty much the response. Like, they wouldn't say, because it was clear that they were stretching on the social media policy thing anyways. But yeah, so the official reason was violation of social media policy.
Okay, and by the way, what state was this in?
Pennsylvania.
Okay. And so was there ever any conversation at all about the content, or were you ever accused of being offensive or anything?
Certainly by people within the company, like by my colleagues. Many of them reached out to me. A couple reached out with supportive messages, but my friends at the company, called me out and tried to talk to me about how offensive what I was saying was and how hurtful, and tried to get me to change my mind. But the company itself, I think I'm trying to remember their exact wording. I think it was that I had harmed someone at the company, or that I had made someone feel uncomfortable, or something along those lines at the company. I was not able to ever get clarity on because they were, naturally protecting the person who complained, which is fair.
Yeah, I think it's weird because I think I was in a way helped by the fact that my employer was completely forthright about the fact that they were firing me because I had tweeted about this stuff and because I had quote unquote invalidated trans identities. So that boosted my case because everything was out in the public. Everyone could see exactly why I was fired, exactly what I had said, and exactly what my boss had said. So, in a way, the way they handled it did help me. And it looks like yours, they were a little more crafty. And then maybe it was harder to bring attention to it. What kind of response did you get after it happened?
Yeah, so I didn't get a lot of like big mainstream press attention or anything. And in hindsight, I'm actually pretty okay with that because it was a really stressful time for me. And I had a lot of other stuff going on too. Like we had to move out of our house because it's like a total side story. But we had gotten attacked at our house. And so we had to move and we were dealing with like that police situation. And so we had like a lot of other stuff going on. And I don't think I could have handled a lot of like big press attention at the time. But I did get a lot of support from the feminist community. And that was really motivating to me. I got a lot of support from feminist writers who I really respected. A couple actually reached out to me and that was really kind of them. And I got a lot of support on different platforms when I posted, people saying like, this is crazy, she got fired for this. I got a ton of private support as well. Lots of people sending me private emails and LinkedIn messages saying, I saw what happened to like people in the Philly tech community saying this is shocking. I'm really scared. I don't know, like, I don't want to say anything because I don't want this to happen to me, but I support you. And so there was at the time a lot of feminist support as well as a lot of private support. But I was really shocked and disappointed that the people who I thought were my friends at the company, those who, I'd been doing this labor organizing with, those who I thought, those whose backs I had had when they were laid off, I was really shocked that I didn't get that support from them.
Just going back to, you said you were attacked at home. Was that related to?
No.
Okay.
No, we were just in a not great neighborhood.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
Yeah, but we're out of there now.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And have you been able to get a new job since then?
Not like a proper, W-2 job. I do have other work that I do. I've managed to keep on one of my bigger freelance clients, which is great. And I have, I've started a few other side gigs for W and Spinster, and people have very generously supported those projects, I think, because they bring value to the feminist community. But no, I have not been able to get another proper job since then.
So, okay, tell us about Spinster and 4W.
Yeah, of course. So Spinster was started in a direct response to me getting fired. In the immediate days after getting fired, I was pretty much just sitting on the couch playing video games, being depressed about it. And my partner, Alex, he basically was like, we've had this idea for a long time to start a feminist Fediverse instance. Let's just do it. And I was like, I don't feel like doing this, I'm depressed. And he was like, no, let's do it. And so we did it. And it was a great way to pull me out of that like fear and depression I was experiencing from this happening, and that motivated me to turn it into something positive and powerful for the community. And because I had just gotten fired, I had sort of this like cred in the feminist community that people took me seriously when I said like I created this new platform. And so what Spinster is it's similar to Twitter in the format. You can create a user account and follow other users. You can post messages and share other people's messages, post pictures and polls and all that kind of stuff. But the main difference between Twitter and Spinster is that Spinster is part of the Fediverse, which is a decentralized and free software social media platform, which allows all of these different servers, each which have their own user base, their own cultures, their own moderation rules. It allows them to all talk to each other. And this is great for preventing censorship, because if one server gets banned, another one can just pop right up. If your user account gets banned from our server, we do have rules on Spinster. We don't allow, any threats of violence or harassment. So if you get banned from Spinster, you can actually just go create an account on another server. And these servers can choose how much they want to federate with others. So if there's another server that you feel is, very much in opposition to the purpose of your server, then you can choose to defederate from them. That happens a lot. A lot of servers have defederated with Spinster. But we defederate from some as well. For example, porn servers. We don't want any porn on Spinster, so we've defederated from porn servers. And it really creates a very robust method for free speech social media, where even if one individual server isn't supporting that free speech, whatever you want to say, there is some place that you can do it, and you can always host your own. And that's what's great about the Fediverse. And Spinster has really taken off. It's become one of the largest Fediverse servers. Like, there are about 5,000, and we're in the top 30. It is certainly by far the largest feminist server. We have brought a lot of women who were not otherwise aware of what the Fediverse was, or interested in free software. We've brought a lot of them into this space, and we now have about 15,000 users from all over the world. And sometimes there's many different languages spoken on Spinster, and people are able to connect with others on this topic, where they can actually talk about the biological reality of being a woman and experiencing sexism without the fear of getting banned.
How did you pick the name Spinster?
Yeah, so the word Spinster, I noticed, has been a theme throughout radical feminist writing for a long time. It was especially motivated by Sheila Jeffrey's book, The Spinster and Her Enemies, which was really important, I think, in shaping my radical feminism. That book really informed a lot of how I understand sexuality and understand the influences, the outside male patriarchal influences that have pushed us towards sex positivity and pushed us towards all of these different modern forms of sexuality. But also, Mary Daly has written a lot about the word spinster, and she's written about what it's like to spin something into existence. And so a lot of people will talk about posting on Spinster as spinning. And we've sort of adopted the spiderweb emoji as our favorite emoji, little icon to reference ourselves, because it references this spinning and weaving, and also just the history of spinsters. And so I think there's this long radical feminist history to the word spinster, to spinning, and that whole concept. So that's where we chose it. And also, it doesn't hurt that it's short and quippy, and it sounds kind of like Twitter.
So, okay, let's go back to your feminist views. And by the way, you have your site 4W. So 4W is fourth wave, right? Referring to fourth wave?
Yes, that's one of the references, but it's also for women. So yeah, it's short for fourth wave, but also for women. And I see a lot of potential ways that 4W, I think, works with feminism.
Okay, cool. So what is fourth wave feminism as you see it, and what brought you to that originally?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if there is an official fourth wave feminism. I've seen some people who I really disagree with claiming fourth wave feminism to be their own as well. But the way I see it is that liberal feminism, mainstream feminism, third wave feminism has essentially abandoned women. Third wave feminism has focused a lot on bringing men into feminism. And while there is an argument that we might need male allies to ultimately be successful, I don't think that ever centering men in our feminism is going to lead to overall positive changes for women. And so definitely my views are very much inspired by second wave feminists. I think the difference, though, is that I don't think we can go backwards in a wave. Like, I really do see the second wave feminists as my foremothers and my friends in many cases, which I'm very happy about. But I don't think we can go back to the second wave because I think we are facing some modern challenges that are different. I think the internet has completely changed the game. Our second wave feminist foremothers really called it on porn, and they really tried to, make clear the threat that porn poses to women, to girls, to society as a whole. But the scale of the problem that they were dealing with then, it's unfathomable compared to what it is now. The problem now is just so much infinitely worse that it's hard to imagine any second wave solutions really being that relevant today. So I think that the similarities between second and fourth wave feminism, as I see it, are that we have the same ideological framework, we have the same understanding of what the problems are, and the same goal of ending patriarchy at the root, ending male violence, ending male sexual access and entitlement to women and girls. But I think that we're going to need to look towards the future, which at this point is the internet. And so I see fourth wave feminism as fighting more on a digital front than necessarily fighting some of the ways that second wave feminists were doing, which were very relevant at their time, but are maybe not as relevant today.
What was it that made you initially question gender identity ideology?
Yeah, so I was a liberal feminist. I was supportive of gender ideology. And I have a family member actually who identified as some form of trans for a very long time. And this happened during a very traumatic moment in my family's life. And so, I spent a lot of time supporting that person and really helping them understand, what they were going through. And then helping others in my family understand what this person was going through. So this is something that I had a lot of up close personal experience with, and was not really questioning of for a long time, for a few years at least. So it really only started to kick into me when I started reading radical feminism. And then I started to, understand sex-based oppression as this class experience for women. I started to get this radical feminist framework. And at that point, I considered myself a radical feminist, but I still didn't really fully disagree with gender ideology. I still would say trans women are women, sure. I didn't really see a conflict between those two at first.
I want to ask you more about your article that you wrote and your opinions. In the article, one thing you wrote is, and to remind people, it's called "Non-binary is the new not like other girls," and it's deeply rooted in misogyny. So you wrote, "I mourn for the women who have disowned their womanhood, choosing to run and hide from the oppression of their gender rather than boldly reject its power over their selfhood." So can you talk a little bit more about what that means to you, and kind of how, we get accused of being intolerant of people, of individuals, and I know that's not true for me. I don't think that's true for you either. And so there's this real lack of nuance that we're criticizing an idea, we're not hating on people. So can you tell us more about that idea that you raised in your article about gender and womanhood?
Yeah, so actually hearing you read that back to me was kind of weird. I haven't reread the article in a long time. I think I might have actually phrased some of that differently now if I rewrote it. Specifically, rather than saying that they were running from their gender, I would say that they were running from their sex. Because I think this conflation of the two terms is something that's become part of the problem here. This is one of the first articles I ever wrote on the topic. But to the actual point, I was talking about this sense of, it's a form of dissociation that I believe a lot of these women feel. And I can understand and empathize with why you would want to dissociate from being a woman very much. And so, yes, it's called that. It's the new not like other girls, because I think that this is something throughout history we have seen. And in recent history, it was saying, I'm not like other girls. You know, I like sports. I'm a cool girl. I program. I like other girls. I have short hair. I'm gender nonconforming in XYZ way. And I'm not like other girls. So please treat me better than you treat them. And I think, you know, that's what Not Like Other Girls was about. And people eventually realized what this was, that this is basically a recognition of how women and girls are treated in society, and that if you see yourself as fully human, as not just this caricature of being what a woman, what a feminine person is supposed to be, then it can be hard to say that you are a woman, because our society really just in so many ways dehumanizes women, and it makes sense that you want to separate yourself from that. But rather than separating yourself from that, I think not only more healthy for society, but healthier for you is to come to terms with the fact that I am a woman, but I'm not what society says a woman is. And that's because society is wrong. I'm not wrong, society is wrong. And this is why I say that I mourn for these women and girls that I have known who have gone through this trouble. Specifically, all of them have turned out to be non-binary, like probably I talk about 3 women in this story, but I mean, I can think of 6, like easily off the top of my head, who I was, you know, close enough with to know their stories. And for all of them, I think that, and I mean, I'm not their mental health professional, so I guess I don't really know at the end of the day, but I think that it would have been better for them if they were able to accept who they are and not see that there was something wrong with them, with the body they were born in, with who they love or are attracted to, but instead recognize that what's wrong is the society, and that we should change the society. We should change gender roles. We should change gender norms, so that if you like feminine things, you don't have to be a woman. Like it used to be, you're a woman, therefore you must be feminine. And now it's you're feminine, therefore you must be a woman. And so if you're not feminine, you must not be a woman. And I just think it's so harmful to individuals who are already struggling with so much else in society. You know, some of these women are also dealing with racism. Some of them are also dealing with homophobia. Some of them are dealing with abusive pasts coming from a religious community. And so they're already dealing with so many other things. And to, on top of it, now have this ideology that's really being hammered into young women, that you must be feminine or you're not a woman, and you should change your body, you should go on hormones, you should cut off your breasts, you should mutilate yourself, potentially sterilize yourself, you should take these actions, these forms of self-harm against your body if you're not feminine. I just think that's the absolute antithesis of feminism. And it's because I have loved these women and girls, and because I have watched their pain and their struggle in patriarchy, that I cannot be silent about it. And they might not like me for saying these things, and they don't. Like many of these, all 3 of the women in that article do not speak to me anymore because of this. But that doesn't mean that I stop caring about them and stop wanting what's best for them. And I also see them as examples, I think, of what's happening on a larger scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there's also this difference between sort of saying, I mean, you're not at all saying that you want to control what other people do, or that you don't want people to transition, or that you think it's weird to transition. You know, it's none of that. It's this political idea. And
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that you wrote about that I think is such an important piece of the puzzle that you are touching on in what you're saying is that when a non-binary woman rejects the label of woman because she's not feminine, and because she doesn't want to be feminine in those stereotypical roles, that she is in a way throwing all other women under the bus. I'm not putting the blame on her, but the concept
Right.
of what they're doing, what the person is doing, is not only changing the idea of who they are and how they want to be seen, but it's also contributing to and affecting the way other women are seen.
Yes, exactly. And we see this a lot with the new language coming out around cis, being a cis woman or cisgendered. Cis is often defined as you identify with the sex or gender you were assigned at birth. And the very idea of cis is absolutely victim blaming, because our gender, the feminine gender that we are expected to be because we were born female, is oppressive. I mean, this is like one of the core tenets of feminism, is that femininity as it currently stands is a form of oppression. Nearly anything that is, if there's one thing that's feminine and one thing that's masculine, the masculine one is either objectively better or it's valued more by society in nearly every instance. There are maybe a few exceptions, things that are a little bit more neutral, but emotional, logical. Emotional is feminine, logical is masculine, and logical is more valued by society. Stronger physically, weaker physically. Like every little thing is gendered in these ways that disenfranchises women. And so for someone to tell me that I identify with being this gender is just absolute victim blaming, because you're saying that I identify with my oppression and that I therefore want to be oppressed, and that if I didn't want to be oppressed, I should just not be a woman. And it's yeah, I mean, it's completely absurd, but it's ridiculous how much this has caught on. And every woman who embraces one of these alternative gender identities in order to escape womanhood, I can't blame her as a individual, because we all do things that we have to do to survive in society. Some of us work at jobs for places that are like evil capitalist companies. I did that. Like, we all just do what we have to do to survive in society, but we can't pretend that there's anything radical, revolutionary, or feminist about this. If you are doing a thing that harms other women, it's not a feminist act. It's the same, wearing makeup. Yes, women wear makeup because if you don't, you will be punished for it. And, I stopped wearing makeup a few years ago, but I don't blame another woman who does wear makeup. But if you do, let's not go around saying that wearing makeup is some big feminist identity. It's not. And I mean, I curled my hair for this interview. I don't have naturally hair that's this beautiful, and normally it's a little bit more Hermione Granger. But I did that because there are expectations of how women look, and I'm not going to pretend that that's some big feminist act that I did to curl my hair for this interview. It's, sometimes women do things to survive in patriarchy that aren't feminist because we're just trying to get by and make the most out of our shitty circumstances. Sorry, I don't know if I can say that on this pod.
Please curse, we like that.
Okay, cool, thank you. But yes, the point is that these individual actions that we take do have larger consequences for other women, and we don't necessarily need to be accountable to them on a personal level, but I think that as a society we need to not try to pretend these things are feminist. And that's what all of third wave feminism is about, is taking things that are oppressive to women, the sex industry, makeup and beauty standards, body standards, gender roles, and trying to twist it into something that, oh, you're empowered now, you're an empowered girl because you embrace these things and you own it and you make money from it. And it's not empowering to women as a whole just because you are surviving doing those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been really bothered by that for a while now, that the idea in mainstream or liberal feminism that anything a woman does is feminist. Well, except, of course, if you're labeled a TERF, in which case you're a fascist.
Or conservative.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that anything a woman in these narrow sets of behavior does is feminist. So even like you're saying, even if it means that you're wearing high heels every day and damaging your back, but you're a power boss, and it's like boss feminism and corporate feminism. Yeah. And I think it's really a mind fuck for young girls. I do. I think it's really insidious for them. They're not being able to differentiate between things that hurt them and things that are actually empowering. Because what does empowerment mean? It means to actually have things that materially give you some status or some control over your own life, some freedom. It doesn't mean to be sexy. That's not the definition of empowerment. So that's one important thing that you just touched on. And another is the idea that you can't identify in and out of an oppressed class. And that brings us back a little bit to your peak trans story. Rachel Dolezal happened. And then you wanted to be inclusive, you wanted to understand, you wanted to educate yourself. I was there too. For me, it was back when Laverne Cox was on the cover of Time magazine, and that's when I was educating myself and started to see something sexist happening in the ideas that were being put forward. So can you walk us through that experience?
Yes. So Rachel Dolezal was happening. She had hit the news with all of her transracial drama. And my partner Alex and I were basically just talking about her in private. And, I was shit talking her, saying how ridiculous she was and how embarrassing and all of this stuff. But he's very open-minded, sometimes too open-minded. And neither of us were gender critical yet. And he said, well, actually, now that I think about it, why can't transracial be a thing if transgender is a thing? And this to me was a pretty shocking and galling and offensive statement, because I was a very liberal, social justice minded person, and I knew that it was not the same. But I couldn't explain to him why. He was saying, well, why is it not the same? Why is it not the same? And I couldn't answer. So I decided to do what everyone says to do and to educate myself by going online to listen to Black trans women and hear what they actually have to say on this issue. So I found a video by Kat Black, who is a male who identifies as a woman and is also Black. And he talks a lot on his YouTube channel about gender, race, feminism, lots of intersectional sorts of conversations. So I was watching this video by Kat, and the point that he was making was that transracial is not a thing and is racist, but transgender is totally valid. And there's a huge difference between the two. And transracial is really offensive and hateful, and transgender is not, and here's why. And I just found all of the arguments that he was making to be so completely obviously untrue. And as I was watching this video, listening to the Black trans woman, as I'm supposed to do as a good liberal, I just found that I could not agree with anything that was being said in this video. And I pretty much had this major moment of cognitive dissonance where I had to realize basically that I did not agree with this major point of liberal ideology, and that I was a TERF. And I knew what a TERF was. I knew that I wasn't supposed to be one, that it was evil and bad. But I knew that I just didn't agree with what I was hearing anymore. And so I went online and started looking up some questions. I forget specifically what I searched, but I eventually ended up on the gender critical subreddit. And reading that was what really pushed me over the edge. Reading these stories of women who were coming from it with just such diverse backgrounds, with so many interesting stories about how gender identity had actually impacted them in the world, the ways that men were infiltrating women's spaces, the ways that they were being not allowed to talk about being a woman, to talk about their female biology. And I realized that these were all things that I had seen as well, especially in my animal rights community. This is something that had been happening a lot, which didn't really click for me until then. But we were, for example, not allowed to say that dairy comes from female cows, because that was considered transphobic. Yeah. And so, actually seeing that this was happening on this mass scale and thinking about what the impacts are for women and women's rights is what really pushed me over the edge.
That's interesting, because I think a few years ago I had heard this idea that was, I don't know if it was really taking root, but that animal rights could incorporate feminism because there were abuses against female animals that were similar to abuses against human women. I don't know if there's any validity to that idea, but it seems like if there was, that can't exist now. If you're not allowed to say that female cows give milk. Or cows.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is actually a theory that I very much do agree with. It was mostly purported by a feminist vegan writer whose name is Carol J. Adams, and she's a second wave feminist who wrote a lot about her primary book on the topic is called The Sexual Politics of Meat, and it does a very deep examination of the comparisons to how women are objectified versus how non-human animals are objectified. And so that's really that book, I think, laid the groundwork and is the basis for this feminist vegan theory that was really taking off and making a lot of ground in the animal rights movement. But yes, now that is an unpopular theory because it requires recognizing the femaleness of both humans and non-human animals. And Carol J. Adams has actually been accused of being a TERF for writing that book, which she wrote in the 70s. She has said that she is not a TERF. She has come out in support of transgenderism and ideology and has done everything she can to try to separate herself from that label. But her very theory is something that is completely at odds with modern gender identity, because we can't know the gender of those cows. We can't know the gender of the chickens who are laying eggs, because how can we know their pronouns? And the two are just completely incompatible. To be a vegan feminist and to be, a gender ideologue, there's no, overlap between the two anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, I kind of want to have you back on just to talk about animal rights another time, but I mean, that whole idea of bringing gender identity ideology to, let's say, the slaughterhouse, for example, it makes no sense. I mean, first thing, animals are sexed, and then their route for life will then be determined, kind of like when you arrived at Auschwitz, you get herded this way or this way, and then your fate depends on that. Well, the animal's fate depends on their sex. Baby chicken, male baby roosters get killed right away, I think.
Yeah, thrown in a grinder.
Yeah. So anyway,
they're just identified as hens.
They would have been fine. Well, they would have lived a little longer to get their beaks cut off, and then.
Oh yeah, honestly, being killed early might actually be a blessing, considering the lives that the hens have up for them. But yeah, either way, like, it's just a different form of hell depending on your sex. For animals in the reproductive industries.
It makes me sad because animal rights is really important to me, and I don't like seeing there's not much of a movement because it gets labeled as terrorist anyway, but it makes me sad to see the movement being overrun by ridiculous ideas that are never going to help animals or help change policy or change minds.
The major problem in animal rights right now. Like I have a good friend who's still very much involved in the movement. I kind of left after I got, labeled a TERF and everything, was not allowed to participate in most groups anymore. But she's still very much involved in as a rad femme. And she has noticed that the more a community prioritizes these gender identities and some of these more social justice activist ideas, the less actual activism they do for animals. And she's noticed, different organizations over time, the more they adopt the social justice principles and the intersectional principles, the more their focus becomes on humans and on things like food justice for people of color, and less about doing actual animal rights activism. And that's not to say there isn't a place for food justice work. Of course there is. But the animal rights activists are the only people who are fighting for non-human animal liberation. So we can't really afford to lose a couple of them to go do potlucks. Like, when what they were doing before was slaughterhouse rescues. And that's actually exactly what I saw happen in the group that I was a part of. When I was there running it, we were actually going into slaughterhouses, getting undercover footage. We were doing rescues, taking animals out of slaughterhouses, liberating them, telling their stories. We were, doing civil disobedience, getting arrested. And then when I was kicked out of the group shifted focus to doing intersectional stuff. And not a single rescue ever happened. Not a single other slaughterhouse investigation ever took place. They were doing potlucks and showing up at human rights events to show like, oh, vegans support this human rights thing. And that's all fine, again, on its own. But yeah, to claim that this is animal rights activism is just simply untrue anymore.
So is that like how feminism now has to center males?
Yeah, exactly. It's totally true. Like they're centering humans in the non-human rights movement. It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, there's this idea that feminism is supposed to, well, that feminism is for everyone. That's a slogan. Feminism is for everyone. It's not necessarily that it's a bad slogan, but the idea that feminism is not a movement for female liberation, which I could be wrong, but I think that idea started being pushed as a response to the accusation of man-hating, as a response to the accusation of feminists just want female privilege. So instead of just ignoring that idea or just refuting it with examples of how males dominate females already, then they came back with this horribly watered down idea that feminism is really for everyone. It's not just for women. And then they have thrown women under the bus with that.
Well, I think in a lot of ways it actually makes it easier for women to be a feminist because you don't really have to change anything about your life. Because it's hard to be a radical feminist, not because you have to do all the required reading, but because it is hard to live in the patriarchal world that we live in, where violence against women is so completely pervasive and constant, and you never really see the depth of it. You never see the end to the sickness that male violence can be. And living in that world is very painful. Living in a world where you see all of the women around you, like sometimes when I'm out in public, I see all of the women, grown women in their 60s, who have shaved legs. And I mean, no hate to any individual woman who does this, but when you know that this comes from a culture of pedophilia and from the desire for a woman to look prepubescent, then you can no longer see these normal things about how women are treated, about what women are expected to do in society. You can't see them the same way that you used to. Instead, you see a bunch of women who are trying to make themselves look prepubescent in order to get male attraction. And that's disturbing. Like, that's fucking disturbing. And so it's hard to actually have your eyes open to radical feminism. So I'm not ultimately surprised that there are women who just want to say, yeah, I'm a woman and I don't want to be oppressed, but I'm not interested in changing anything about my life. I don't want to have my eyes opened. Like, it's hard.
Yeah.
I think that's a part of it. And I think that's why we see so many women. Like, it's a lot of men will criticize what we're saying by saying, okay, yeah, but feminist women pushed all that. And they're actually not wrong. But I think that doesn't mean it wasn't because of patriarchy. Like, it was because patriarchy, because like real feminism is so painful to acknowledge, that these women wanted to find, I think, an easier route to find some sort of empowerment that doesn't involve upending their entire lives, their marriages, their families. Like, these are uncomfortable positions to be in.
This is a bigger question, but do you have a vision or an idea of how maybe it seems like a lot of us who realized this stuff came to it accidentally, or we stumbled upon it, or we were just particularly inquisitive, but how could we help bring this to young women? How could we somehow bridge that gap? Because so many young women are being influenced by this new sort of bullshit feminism that you're describing.
I think the biggest problem we're facing right now is the censorship, the media blackout, and the culture of fear around speaking out on this issue. So I think anything that we do to address any of those three is absolutely progress and is moving in a good direction. So as far as censorship, find ways to, like, when you're censored, go someplace else. So for example, obviously I talked about Spinster, and so a lot of women who have been kicked off of Twitter, Megan Murphy, Claire Graham, Posey Parker, like lots of feminists who have been kicked off of Twitter have moved over to Spinster. Or, when the gender critical subreddit was banned, I helped them put together overit.com, which is an alternative that basically revitalized the gender critical space. So anything that we can do to fight this censorship by creating spaces that are owned, controlled, and run entirely by women, by feminists, is really important. But I think the fear of speaking out is massive. And as you and I can say, that the fear is not unfounded. You're not paranoid if you're scared about getting fired from your job. But what I will say is I think that a lot more people could actually take the hit than are willing to. And I think a lot more people are in safer positions than they maybe fear that they are in. For example, if you're in a 2-income household, if you have health insurance in a different way than, for example, through your job, if you live in a country, for example, where you have universal health insurance, like here in the US, like when I got fired, I lost my health insurance. I have not had health insurance since. I imagine it's probably similar for you. And so, like, there are people who are in good positions if you have a lot of savings. Like, I think that the more people who speak out and take the risk, then the easier you're going to make it for everyone else. So for one, you don't know if you're going to get fired. But even if you did, I think you can make that an intentional decision. For example, when I got fired, I didn't write this article going in blind. Like, I knew there was a chance I would get fired, and I did not publish this article, or it was my second one on the topic. The one prior, I waited to publish those until I had 6 months of savings saved up. And I was in a really well-paying job at the time that I'll never be in again. So being able to even do that was certainly a privilege. But if you're able to plan to, support your own free speech, then I think that's something that you can do as an intentional decision. But then I think also, just if you're not in that position to speak up, then support those who are. I think that there are ways that, there are actually so many people who agree with us. Like, our position is not an unpopular one. There are recent polls by Wolf, the Women's Liberation Front, that show that in states as different as Idaho, a very red state, and California, a very blue state, that very similar numbers, around like 70% of people actually hold the same ideas that we do on this topic. So this is not an unpopular position, but everyone's too afraid to say so. So if someone does say so, then use the power of numbers to support them. When people get fired, like, yeah, support them financially. Like, if someone, has a crowdfunder for their case, or a Patreon or something, you can support them if you're in a position to. But even more than supporting financially, I think we need to see a groundswell of numbers of women banding together. And this kind of circles back to the beginning of the pod when we were talking about labor organizing. And I think that the role of labor in the feminism movement and the power that could be there, I think, has been very much ignored. And I think that it would be interesting to see what could be done with labor organizing tactics for feminism for women at work. Specifically, I've kind of had daydreams about a radical feminist labor union where we somehow all join together, and then if one person is fired or faces consequences for their speech, then we all strike. And there's so many of us that they can't do anything about it across different industries. And these are all like big ideas, but I think that if women want to actually get to a point where we have the power to speak freely on issues that relate to us, we're going to have to take some big actions. And so I think fighting online censorship, supporting people when they do speak out, and organizing en masse is going to be important.
I love the idea of bringing class more into it, because the way I see it is that the only way for us to really affect real change is to have more democracy in the workplace, have better workers' rights, have less restriction from capitalist exploitation that we have when we work for a wage. So I would like to see more of that.
Yeah, things like universal healthcare and universal basic income, these are important issues on their own, certainly, but they're also feminist issues and they're also now free speech issues. Because if when you get fired from your job, you can lose your healthcare, your kids' healthcare, your income that you put food on the table with, that puts a roof over your head, like you lose all these things when you lose a job. And so if we had a social security net that could actually provide safety for women, if, a universal daycare, like if you didn't have to worry about feeding your kids, having your health insurance, getting them into a safe place during the day, then really the risks that you're actually facing when you get fired are a lot less material. It's a lot more status. It's a lot more ego blow. It's, there might be some financial loss, but you have a social safety net. You're not concerned about losing your food, your house, your kids. Then I feel like a lot of that risk, the fear of speaking out, goes away. And this is why I think, yeah, universal healthcare and UBI are really important issues for women. And not just because of free speech, but because of so many other differences, I think, in how women are positioned in society. The fact that so many of us rely on husbands' healthcare. And, if you get fired from your job, like I spoke to a woman recently who got fired from her job, and now she is on her husband's healthcare and relies on her husband's income. And her husband's probably fine. Like he's probably, like I have no reason to believe there's anything bad in that relationship. But that's not a position that women should be forced into. And so providing, yes, a lot of these more class-based, I think, resources and social safety nets is really important for women, for feminism, and for free speech across the board, like regardless of feminism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really don't see how you can call yourself a leftist or let alone a socialist or a democratic socialist and cheer for people getting fired for their opinions and having all these consequences, these very material consequences, like you're saying. So Thank you so much for sharing your story. And the last thing that I want to ask you is if you have any book recommendations for people. You did mention Mary Daly, who I also love, and you mentioned Sheila Jeffries. So what should we be reading to learn more about this?
That's a very good question. Let me see. I'm going to awkwardly turn around and look at my bookshelf.
Yeah,
This is big off the top of my head. Honestly, I think I'd be remiss at this point if I didn't mention Invisible Damage by Abigail Schreier. She is a thoroughly canceled woman. Lots of places are trying to censor her, are trying to shut that book down. It recently came out and it talks about the impact of gender ideology on young girls specifically, a lot of the stuff that we kind of talked about earlier today, but more with a focus on children, on youth. And so I think that if you're looking for a book on this topic and you want to support a woman who is being canceled and shut down by mainstream media at every turn, definitely that book has been good. I'm like maybe halfway through it and I've gotten a lot out of it so far. I consider myself educated on the topic and I'm still learning so much.
All right, that's a great recommendation. Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you for having me.
You're not defined by your